Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a late night special here on the channel. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. Join me today as we read another book from author Francisco Colom Brana in his Angel Wing series, with the second book entitled The Council of the Three. Now, if you remember my first episode I did with this trilogy, this book follows the story of angels and humans coexisting on Earth, or known as Gaia. And much has changed since the first book. So, without further ado, let us read Book 2 in the Wing series, The Council of Three, by F.R. Colom Brana. Preface. Excerpt from A History of Gaia, Volume 1 and 2. The weapons wielded by archangels were deemed holy weapons. Only angels possessing the strength could use such divine items correctly. In their hands, and in their hands only, could their true powers shine through. No mortal could activate the abilities of such items. Although there are several holy weapons in existence, the three most iconic are, naturally, the principal weapons wielded by the archangels: Lumen's great sword Moonlight, Susurro's spear Thunderbolt, and Akas's straight sword Doomsday. Moonlight remains in Lumen's possession, and Thunderbolt lies deep in Eterna Heart's vault. The Black Blade Doomsday has been missing since the death of Akasus. For centuries, Doomsday has been highly sought after, and although many have claimed at one time or another to have found the Angel of Death's weapon, none of these claims have been validated. However, Doomsday is believed to be lost somewhere in the desert, Oxus's place of death. Other named holy weapons, locations of which are also unknown at present, are Susurro's sword Sprite, the staff of Yggdrasil or Imperium, Gungir, God's hammer, and Toho, God's bow, famed never to miss a mark. This does not disprove the existence of other holy weapons, although King Lumen will not divulge any more information regarding such artifacts. The following includes information on holy armors. And so, centuries after Ox's death, the three reignited the Eterna Heart chimney and cursed the men of Anora, transforming them into beasts. The three would deem their punishment irreversible, a permanent reminder to the world should anyone challenge the power of the councilmen. Now labeled wolfsmen by the rest of the world, these poor beings would forever be enslaved to any pixie they might encounter. They were to live out their existence in Anora and care for the forests, now known as the Edge Woods. However, smoke continued to bellow from the chimney after its use against the people of Anora, and the councilmen were granted unimaginable power. Only they, survivors of the Angel Civil War and witnesses of Akasus' fall, knew how to wield it. Many believed their long lives were a symptom of the Archangel's death's blast. The Wolfsmen and the Valkyrie, who were also present, experienced the same unnatural lifespan. Despite warding off the threat of Anora, civil unrest grew within the Pixie capital, this time for fear of their leader's power. The year after the Wolfman's curse, the chimneys continued to bellow. Fearing the chimney's power, the Pixies of Eterna Heart revolted against their leaders. Protests and riots ensued for a decade. The majority believed the unlimited power of the council made them cruel and allowed their tyranny to go unchecked. After a series of violent protests in the capital, it is said that over 500 Pixies were executed by the councilmen on the night of 1 Quin 212 AW, or after the Angelic Wars. A mob of protesters overcame the guards and broke into the palace. Chief of the council was taken hostage until the other two councilmen met the mob's demands. After a month of discussion and negotiations, the two remaining councilmen finally yielded. A new government was created. The councilmen would step down, and the Pixies would be ruled by a monarchy. A royal bloodline would have final say in government affairs. However, the councilmen would maintain positions in government as advisors to future kings and queens. The chimney was never to be used again, and the three would remain in Eternal Heart for the remainder of their existence. At the time of writing, king and queens had peacefully ruled Eternal Heart for 6 centuries. Despite the sieve parley, the Council of the Three still play a key role in government. As rulers have been born, lived, ruled, and passed away, one thing has remained constant: the Three. Sieve, Midi, and Sin have crowned, served, and buried every one of Eternal Heart's kings and queens, but the chimneys lay dormant, and the three are very rarely seen publicly. It is said that age has at last begun to catch up with them, and they prefer the quiet seclusion. However, true to their word, they advise those of the royal court to this day. Chapter 1. Falling. Year: 823. Month: Duende. Day: 16. The entire castle shook on the verge of collapse. Athed threw one of Susurro's arms over his shoulders, half carrying him as they fled. At the centuries of imprisonment, Susurro struggled to move quickly. Before them was an impossibly long flight of stairs stretching deep below. After a final glance around the prisoner's small room, the young boy and the old angel began their descent. "I'm sorry. I have not walked in a long time," Susurro apologized, knowing he was slowing the escape. "It's okay, but I need you to try your best," Athed replied, eyes glowing red and brilliant in the presence of the angel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they made it to the foot of the stairs together. Athed desperately looked around, hoping to find some hint as to which direction they should go. But the castle was a maze. The roof above them shook violently. The walls quaked. Brick and mortar fell from the ceiling, threatening to crush them both. "This castle is too big. Do you know where to go?" Susurro simply pointed ahead towards a single passageway. Gathering all his strength, Athed walked on, praying Susurro was right. "We have to make it to the griffins before it's too late," Athed strained to say. Susurro was a lot taller than him and heavier than he would have ever imagined for someone so old and frail looking. It was awkward and difficult to support him and keep moving, yet Athed carried on. He was halfway through the passageway when he thought he heard something. A whisper, almost indistinguishable amongst the chaos of falling buildings. Something was calling out to him in a small, quiet voice. Another riddle in this castle full of mysteries. As he pushed forward, he heard it again and again. At last he could make it out. He could make out what it was saying. "Athed," he heard a small voice cry. It sounded so far away. "Isabelle, is that you?" he thought. There was a faint light at the end of the passageway. A way out, Athed hoped. As he neared the light, the voice calling his name grew louder. A fire grew in his chest, and he pushed to make it outside before his strength failed him. Finally, Athed made it to the end of the passage, Susurro leading on him heavily. They found themselves on a balcony overlooking a courtyard. Beneath them were lush gardens and ornate fountains, but beyond the courtyard was more castle. The building went on and on. It was an impossible distance to cover, given the violent shaking the structure was undergoing. "Damn! How'll we make it to the griffins?" He desperately looked around for a path, for a shortcut, for a way back. Anything. And then he saw her, standing on another balcony overlooking the courtyard, opposite him. Her dark hair blew in the wind as she hung on the rails, searching. Then it looked like her gaze caught his. "Isabelle!" The fires flared once more. Hope. With a loud crash, a fissure formed in the courtyard, splitting the castle in two. The noise was horrible. The beautiful gardens and fountains caved into a crack so massive, at the thought he saw white-capped mountains beneath him in the cavernous hole. And there she was on the other side of the deadly cleft. Before he knew it, the ground beneath him pulled backwards, away from the danger, and he could see Isabelle no more. "Isabelle!" he cried out wildly, just as he lost sight of her. Then he could feel it, the sick feeling of falling. He lurched down. In a flash, Athed felt wings envelop him. Suddenly, everything was black. Chapter 2. A growing resistance. Year: 824. Month, Duen. Day, 13. A growing resistance. The streets were dark. Night had fallen over the city of Ventusfan. The city was largely empty at this time, except for bored soldiers endlessly patrolling the quiet streets. Isabelle snuck through the shadows. She had to stay hidden. General Leo had imposed a curfew several weeks ago, the moment he heard rumors of resistance growing. The general was harsh and uncompromising, but he was not wrong. In fact, Isabelle was silently wending her way through the empty city to find an informant within Leo's army. The resistance would keep tabs on all his movements, nightly lockdowns or not. Despite being disguised in military uniform, Isabelle preferred not to be seen at all. She wanted to avoid having to explain herself if she were caught. She was confident she could talk her way out of trouble. With the war effort, with everything that has happened since her departure from Haven, Isabelle White was not an interesting enough individual for the government to pour resources into catching. Ironically, the Brana harm would save her, serving its intended purpose of attaching her to the military. A sword between a pair of wings, seared into the flesh of all soldiers sworn to serve in Haven's military. As she made it to a crossing in the street, a patrol passed before her. A few foot soldiers marching alongside two mechanized walkers. Luckily, no one saw her. She seized the chance to cross the street and quickly slipped back into dark alleys. Having spent the last month and a half here, she was beginning to find a new way around, discovering the best hidden and rarely used paths disregarded by military patrols. There's location, she thought. Celes had told her the informant would meet her tonight in an alley near the southern wall. In a marked street near a Bloom streetlight lit with a specific pattern. Pixie streetlights were smoothly curved tree bark, split into three at the top, with lantern on all three ends. She spotted the streetlight easily, 4 down from the one nearest her. Every streetlight had all 3 lanterns lit. This one had only one. Silently, she crept into the alley. Straining to see in the dark, she carefully made her way forward. In the back of her head lurched the constant fear that the next meeting might not be with the informant, but rather a seeker or a soldier in Terra's regime. Or worse, that the informant may have been a double agent from the beginning. But Celes had sworn on her life that the informant was on their side, and Isabelle trusted Celes. A small light flashed from the far end of the alley. Isabelle pulled out a small lantern with a shutter, which she opened and closed twice in response. In the dark, a hooded figure stood up. "Isabelle?" the figure asked quietly. "That voice sounds familiar, but I cannot place it. Emel?" she answered. An obvious cover name. That was the name of one of Lumen's top angel lieutenants during the Angel Civil War. Should I have used a cover name? Celes didn't give me a choice. "I have little time, but there is major news from the Resistance," he continued. Isabelle drew closer. "King Cyan will arrive in Ventusfan in 2 days. He will personally lead the invasion to Pixie lands," the figure said. 2 days! Isabelle spluttered. She quickly put a hand to her mouth to hide her outburst. "Sorry, this news is... it's unexpected." "Yes, he brings thousands more walkers and soldiers from Haven." The figure continued. "You must strike soon. He plans to consolidate his forces with General Leo and make haste towards Athed. It will be an army unparalleled, unstoppable. The Pixies will not stand a chance." "Yes, then I don't have a moment to waste," Isabelle replied. "I must report this to Celes at once." "That is not all," he said. Isabelle could feel dread rising within her. What more could there possibly be? Cyan brings with him a weapon of mass destruction. He's been working on it in secret for months. It is rumored to be a cannon capable of leveling a city in a single night. No mage, however strong their barriers are, will be able to withstand the might of this machine. He calls it his Nightbringer, Twilight. "What can we do?" Isabelle said. "Delay his forces here." "However you can." "How, exactly?" "You have worked on army machines before, have you not?" he asked. "There must be some sort of weakness, some way to sabotage them and buy some time. Time to plan a proper retaliation. If we can stop his forces here, perhaps we can stop this war from bleeding into Pixie lands proper." "Yes, you're right. I must get back. We must act quickly," she said with resolve. "Good. We "We must act quickly," he replied. Suddenly, they could hear movement in the streets. A patrol. "Hey, that streetlight is faulty," a nearby soldier pointed. "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" another soldier replied. "Nothing. I'll get a pixie slave to look at it tomorrow," the first replied. The hooded figure pressed himself and Isabelle into a wall as the soldiers walked beneath the broken streetlight. A few feet away from them, the figure moved his index finger in front of his cloaked face, motioning for silence. One of the soldiers peered into the alleyway, but could not make out nothing in the dark. They moved on. "I must go. I will reach out to Celes when I have more information." Although she was right beside him, Isabelle could not make out who was beneath the hood. A subtle glimmer of light revealed he was wearing a metallic helmet, but she could see no more. After checking the soldiers were out of sight, the figure moved away from the wall and made his way down the alley, quickly and quietly. "Wait," Isabelle quietly said. How did you know I was a mechanic?" Without turning around, he replied, "I know you, Isabelle." Then he rounded the corner and disappeared into the city. Isabelle shook her head. Who was that? Isabelle readied herself to retrace her steps through the city. Using the shadows, she crept along quietly once more, as she made her way to the resistance base in the southwestern part of the city. The way back was somewhat peaceful. Everything was quiet, minus the occasional sounds of patrols. It was a short distance, and Isabelle took the more scenic route near the wall at the edge of the city. Some time ago, she found some stairs leading to an abandoned lookout tower. It was dilapidated, structurally unsafe, something destroyed in Leo's siege, long since replaced with more modern lookout platforms for soldiers, left to crumble. From the ruins, she looked out towards the Fregus Mountains. She could not see them from this distance, but she cast her eyes in the direction anyway, beyond the vastness of the desert. This was something she found herself doing often, whenever she had the chance. Watching the distant dunes shift, she sat alone in the dark at the top of the ruined tower, thinking back to the collapse of the flying fortress 3 months ago. The memories were so fresh in her mind. Teria and the elite squadron of seekers had an altercation before really leaving the edge woods. Jacob managed to sabotage Teria's bike so they could get away. The last she heard of him was that Teria had brought him back to General Leo, where he was severely tortured before being hanged. Fleeing from Teria, the Griffins carried them the rest of the way into the Fregus Mountains, where they were greeted by the elusive Valkyrie, who led them to the flying fortress. That's when everything went downhill. Hilda, their leader, led them into a cursed labyrinth within the council, and that's the last Isabelle saw of Athed. The last time anyone saw him, just before they were overcome by visions. By the time Isabelle had emerged from the ravine, all the Valkyries were dead and the council was crumbling until at last it fell down from the sky. Isabelle and her friends narrowly escaped with their lives. They had flown back to the wreckage on their griffins the next day. The debris had settled and the temperature was cool. They found no signs of Athed or the angel he escorted. Isabelle wanted to keep looking, but Celes and Bane knew it was a lost cause. Even if Athed were alive, there was no way the three of them could scour every inch of those mountains. It left her defeated and angered to think that she had failed Athed, and now, at the endless nights of torment, she found herself back in Ventusfan, a new purpose at hand, to help the Pixies and try to end this war. But still she looked back to the mountains. Though these were cold nights, but they had reached the end of winter now. Snow would slowly fall at night or on cold days, but it would melt away beneath the morning sunrise. And it was a blessing. It had been a brutal winter, just as they had feared before they ventured into the Fregus Mountains. Athed was lost, and she had left him in those mountains, alone, in the unrelenting cold. She had never lost hope that Athed might still be alive out there, and prayed to God that he might make it through, that he made it through, somehow. Isabelle gathered herself and stood up. She made her way back down to the tower, and in the shadow of the outer wall, she traversed back to the secret base, which was now her home. She stopped in front of a wide, rusted sewer gate. After a quick scan and check to see if the coast was clear, she knelt down, pulled the crate open, and quickly jumped inside. She found herself standing in the middle of the sewer, with a little bit of moonlight filtering through the grate above her. She retrieved her small gas lantern from inside her winter clothes. With a few clicks, the little lantern came to life. Holding it in front of her, she made her way through the sewers. Water sloshed under her footsteps. Along the walls, rats and roaches skirted away from her movements. After a few turns, she stood before the locked gate, beyond which flames were flickering cheerfully. Hearing Isabelle's arrival, a large pixie stood up from the corner opposite. Robert, one of the Celestian soldiers who survived the siege. Password? He questioned. Isabelle shook her head and chuckled. Lumen. He opened the gate and she walked in. You know who I am, Robert. He held up a light close to get a good look at her and nodded. Robert was an ordinary pixie. He was large in frame, different from the slender, subtle tone builds of most of his kind. He had a short ponytail and a salt and pepper beard. His size was startling, but he was a gentle giant. That was until foes had to face him in battle, of course. Orders are orders, he finally said in reply, shrugging. Listen, Robert, I need to talk to Celes as soon as possible. I have urgent news, Isabelle said, realizing the late hour. She's in her quarters, expecting you, Robert said, locking the gate behind them. Isabelle thanked him. The resistance had holed themselves up fairly well beneath the city of Ventusfan. Underground was a small city beneath its overgrown counterpart. All the city sewers led to the central opening they had occupied, which provided a space large enough for their numbers. Hundreds had camped down here. Citizens, warriors, even humans who had not left the city before the siege. They had all made their way underground together to join the resistance. Upon their return from the flying fortress, Celes had made it her mission to save as many lives as she could from General Leo. Word had spread north that he was enslaving any pixie who survived the siege, forcing them to work, build, and do whatever bidding Haven's army wanted under fear of torment. To the humans of Ventusfan, he gave the option of imprisonment or slavery as punishment for refusing to evacuate. There had been a difficult conversation between Theseus and Celes when she told him that she would not be going with him to the Pixie capital. He had not yet fully recovered from his wounds, but Celes was determined that she would no longer stand by and watch others die in the service of the Pixies. She told Theseus to carry on with his mission, deliver the staff they had recovered to Eternal Heart. Once he was back to full health, she would meet him there, eventually. For the time being, her heart pulled towards helping the growing resistance in Ventusfan. The surviving captains and lieutenants from Celestia's army had formed the resistance underground, freeing as many pixies and humans as they could from Leo's tyranny. Leo had yet to discover where they were hiding, but he paid them no attention as their actions had been small and inconsequential in his eyes. Celes knew the city's complex underground network, and upon her return, she quickly discovered the survivors and joined them. She would quickly become the leader of their movement. This was how Isabella found herself staying in Ventusfan. She thought about going north, back to her home in Fairtown, but something in her had changed since helping Athed to the Flying Fortress. It would have felt wrong, like a failure, to go back to her family and hide out with her parents, fleeing the armies of Haven as a traitor. She would put them at risk, and for what? She was already a traitor. Why not live up to her role and see if she could not prevent further suffering and redeem herself? If she stopped Cyan's war, it would make seeing her family again worth it, whether she was a traitor or not. They must have been worried sick about her. They hadn't heard from her in months, and news of what she had done had probably reached them by now. Who knows what they thought about her? In the end, she found comfort knowing their family bond was strong. This was her heart's calling. Given the chance to explain herself, they would understand and accept her. Isabelle made her way through the crowded beds, cots, blankets, and whatever else the survivors and stragglers had scavenged to sleep in. Celes slept in the corner of the next opening, in much or less the same conditions as everyone else. A blanket on the floor marked her bed. Isabelle could see a light emanating around the corner of her makeshift room. "She's awake! Thank the angels!" She rounded the corner and saw both Bane and Celes cross-legged on the floor, a couple of other pixie soldiers standing around them. Clearly, they were planning something. "Isabelle, you made it. What do you bring?" Celes eagerly asked from the ground. In silence, the group waited for a reply. She took a deep breath in and passed on her message. Cyan would arrive in 2 days, bringing with him a weapon capable of mass destruction. "This is grave news indeed. We have planned to rescue more slaves 4 days from now, but now it seems that we may not have enough time," Celes said. "What do you want us to do, my lady?" one of the soldiers asked. "For now I want you to rest. It is late, and we have much to do in little time," Celes replied. "At first light I will have orders for you. Thank you, everyone, but you'll be no good to anyone sleep-deprived. Good night." The soldiers looked at each other, then nodded in agreement. They stepped out, leaving Bane, Celes, and Isabelle together. "This is bad news. I had hoped he would keep delaying his arrival," Celes said. "He must have figured out how to leave the city of Haven secure from the monster attacks. Or maybe they aren't suffering as badly as before. Either way, this means he intends to double down on his promise to bring our in. At present, we don't have the numbers to attack Leo. When Cyan's forces join his, there'll be nothing we can do. We are too few here to make a stand against any army, much less their armies combined," Bane said angrily. The three put their heads down and sulked for a moment. But then an idea struck Isabelle. "Delay their forces however you can. Celes, the informant presented me with an idea. Maybe we should find a way to delay Leo and Cyan's forces," Isabelle said. "We do not have to defeat their armies, but we can delay them from invading your lands. Create more time to come up with another plan." "Yes," Celes agreed. "But how?" "Your informant somehow knew of my experience with machines. You must have told him more than I anticipated," Isabelle said. Celes let out a smile at the corner of her mouth, but Isabelle continued. "You were not there when I was attacked with Sada, but the Seeker's bikes had an exposed gear chain, a weakness. Jacob must have damaged something similar when he sabotaged the Seeker's bikes to let us get away to the flying fortress. I have limited knowledge on the walkers, but I am certain I can find a weakness in their machinery we can exploit." "Yes, if we can disable their walkers, it would definitely buy some time. Maybe have time to rescue the rest of my people here." "That's it, Isabelle. Our goal should be to rescue our remaining people and help them flee," Celes said. "I knew Ramil would pull through. How can I have ever doubted him? There's only one problem. I haven't worked on walkers. If I had a walker, I could reverse engineer to find a weakness. As we are, we don't have one. We might have some complications in executing this plan," Isabelle said. "Actually, I have an idea that might help you there, Isabelle," Bane interjected. "What is that, Bane?" Isabelle eagerly asked. "I have seen the wreckage of walkers near the western walls. They must have left there since the siege took place," Bane said. "I can take you there. My point is, you'll have all the walkers you need at your disposal. You can tinker around until you find your solution." "Okay. Yes. If I can examine one of those walkers, I can find a weakness." "Exactly," Bane said. "We should go tonight. Patrols were few and far between," Isabelle said. She soon found excitement to eliminate any tiredness she had felt. "Isabelle, you've been up all night. Are you sure?" Celes asked. "Yes. If what Ramil says is true, we don't have much time before Cyan gets here and marches to Eternal Heart," Isabelle said. "If I find that weakness tonight, you can hand out your orders to your men at dawn, and they will know what to target." "I will go with you," Bane said, standing up. "I know where it is. Besides, I can sniff out a patrol before they get anywhere near us." "Yes, Bane. Go with her." Celes agreed. She stood up as well. "But please be careful. I need you two back here, both of you. I would have liked to get some rest, but I am certain worrying will keep me up a little longer." Both Bane and Isabelle nodded agreement. Celes sat down, and the pair made their way out of the sewers. Robert stood to unlock the gate for them. "Out again already?" Robert asked. "Unfortunately, Robert, wait for our return. We'll be back soon," Isabelle said, confident that she would be back before sunrise. "Of course, Belle. Be careful," Robert said. They lit the lanterns and ventured into the tunnels as Robert closed the gate. Bane led Isabelle in a different route than before. However, she knew where she was going. She'd become an expert at navigating through the dark effortlessly. Though she stepped ahead of him. "Used these tunnels already, huh?" Bane asked, impressed by her memory. "Maybe you didn't need me to guide you after all. After exploring these tunnels for months, I told myself that I would no longer get lost," she chuckled with her reply. Thinking of how often she found herself lost in these sewers when she arrived. No longer a lost pup. "I love it," Bane smirked. After a few more turns, they reached a crate on the bottom of the western wall. Bane made his way through the grate first. He stood in silence, attentively listening to the sounds right outside and sniffing for patrols. "We should be good," he whispered. He pushed the grate upwards, crawled out, and turned to help Isabelle out of the sewers. The bright moon lit the surrounding area and wall. To their left, no more than 2 blocks down, was the rubble of the western gate, crumbled from the siege. Leo had his men build a temporary fix by fixing wooden boards, pallets, and sheets across the gap. Wooden spikes had been driven to the ground to deter visitors at any permanent guard stood a watch. Walkers on the ground, the foot soldiers atop the walls. We must avoid them at all costs, Isabelle whispered. Bane nodded in agreement, then motioned to an area to their right. All along the walls, roads and buildings were scarred from the siege. Collapsed roofs, holes in the ground, and crumbling masonry riddled the city. This area had the worst damage, and it made the hairs on the back of Isabelle's neck rise. The thought of all the death that took place here made her heart heavy. Bane led her to a slight opening between a couple of small houses. Families probably raised livestock here, Isabelle thought, and saw the bones of a cow protruding from the ground. However, just past those remains was a pile of twisted metal scraps. Something mechanical had been a part of the wreckage. Here, Bane whispered, pointing forward. That's the pile of walkers. Isabelle knelt beside the pile and strained to see. It was a mass of twisted metal, a mix of bites and walkers thrown together into one big, disheveled heap. Bane, I can't make out one thing from another, she whispered. I need a light. He looked around. I think the coast is clear. Isabelle lit a lantern and picked her way carefully through the mangled walker pile while Bane kept watch. Twisted arms and legs, something that looked like a lever, but she couldn't see any obvious weakness. How the hell am I going to... Wait! There! Isabelle pulled on a part of machinery, but the chain she wanted did not come loose. Bane saw what she was trying to do and offered his aid. Together they pulled on the chain, raising some of the pile up. With a snap, the chain broke. The metal pile came crashing down. What was that? A soldier called from the top of the old gate. Something we should investigate, another replied. Isabelle and Bane leapt back from their building. Moving quickly, Isabelle gestured frantically for Bane to follow her back towards the grate on the wall. Soldiers rapidly approached the old walker pile. Soon their lanterns illuminated the dark spot Isabelle and Bane had just fled. Weird, one soldier said. It could have been a rat or something. A pretty big rat, if that. Bane quietly closed the grate behind him under the sound of the soldiers' conversation. He found his footing in the sewer and turned around. Please tell me you found something useful. Isabelle held out her lantern, revealing a small chain swinging from her hand. Yes, Bane, I did. And we will stop here for the second book impressions of this trilogy. Now, already right now, I am intrigued with this story. I love how the author always adds a little bit more lore in the excerpt from the volumes of Gaia, how it continues to build the world. And what I also like is how it's unique to this particular story. And I'm very intrigued to see where it goes next. I love the characters. I love the dialogue. It's very fleshed out. It feels very organic. And all around, it reads so well. It feels incredible. You can really sense the tension. You can really sense that Isabelle, Celes, Bane are in a dire situation. And I absolutely love this. Now, you also have to wait, unfortunately, for the third episode, which will be the final of this trilogy. But for right now, my review of this book is easily another 5 out of 5. This is an amazing read, and like before with the first one, I will link it down below for you to purchase it. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed this late night Wandering Quill book impressions here on the channel. Thank you so much for your support, and be on the lookout for future episodes, either historian interviews, author interviews, or upcoming news of monthly Historians Lounge guests. And be sure to follow my newsletter to stay up to date. Well, listeners, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Have a good evening, everyone.